All right, so anyone who's watching this in Acts 12:24 churches, my name's Tupper, and I work in the conference office, and I've got below me Al Sones, the conference meg chair and pastor at Good News Church, and to my side here is Chris Herder, executive pastor at Faith Community Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And we're just going to be going through the Paycheck Protection Program, which is part of the CARES Act, the stimulus package related to the novel coronavirus and the economic downturn here early in 2020. The loan funds and applications can start to be processed at the time of the recording tomorrow, but Friday, April 3rd is the day that the funds are available to be distributed by banks. It's when banks are going to start receiving applications and processing them. I guess some banks may start trying to do some of that paperwork earlier, but officially Friday, April 3rd, 2020 is the first day banks are processing and going to be dispersing these loan funds. So if you're watching this before then, or you're still making a decision about if you want to go through this process or not, a couple things to have in mind is there's plenty of funds available for the program. So it's not a situation where anyone's expecting you to have to rush out, make a decision immediately. And everyone who I've been interacted with in a kind of a national business level is saying like Congress will refund this budget line should the funds get all used up. There's enough funds in it right now for every small business to get a 6-week loan, and they're offering up to 10 weeks of loans for them. So there's not quite enough funds for every small business to take the full amount. However, I know a lot of churches are not going to take the full amount of their loans. I know a lot of businesses aren't going to take the loans at all. They're not going to fit for everybody. So that's the reason for a kind of a slight underfunding there. But you're not in any rush to go out and fill this out right now. But so the first things you're going to need to do is really contact your local bank, and whoever you do your payroll with, whoever you do your normal checking accounts with, tell them you're interested in participating in the Paycheck Protection Program through the CARES Act, and ask them if they are an approved bank for filling out those applications for depositing those funds. If they're not, then you can actually search for, you're just going to have to do a search for that online. Most large banks, M&T and Wells Fargo, Citibank, Chase, any sort of regional banks, they're all going to be pre-approved to do these kind of loans. And so you just want to contact another major bank in your area if your local bank doesn't do that. At the end of the day, and I'll say this a few times, the bank is the lender and they have the final say in how much you can borrow, and they'll have the final say in how much is forgiven. So if you have a personal relationship with your banker, that just has the relationship helps that process along. They know who you are, they know you're a church, they know you're working with integrity through all of those things. The other thing you're going to want to do, besides contacting your bank about that and setting up a time to go in, is to begin to gather a year's worth of your payroll processing. So April of 2019 through March of 2020, you're going to want to get all your monthly payroll statements together because you're going to need that information in order to apply for this loan. The bank is going to ask for that. There's a lot of ways you can figure that out, but basically everything that you pay out to the employees, except for their federal income tax and any salary dollars that are above $100,000 a year, will count into that. So if your pastor or staff member makes $120,000 a year, then that comes down to $10,000 a month. You can only count in your calculation, it's $8,333 per month toward this loan process. So that other $1,700 is just money that you're not going to be able to get a loan from. It's not going to be able to be forgiven. It's not going to be a part of this this process. So federal income tax and salary equivalency over $100,000. Chris, anything else? Is there anything else that you think churches should be doing, like before they walk in the bank to file the application? What else should our churches be doing?
I mean, the only other thing I could think of, and I don't know if it's applicable or not, but what if, you know, the church offers any kind of additional benefits, you know, rather it be life insurance or some kind of, you know, secondary, you know, policies. Are those considered in as, you know, total compensation or, you know, salaries?
They are. So if your pastor makes $4,000 a month and the church pays $100 a month for a life insurance policy and $200 a month for health insurance, then that pastor is going to be able to have that $300, the $100 for the $300 for those insurances is actually going to be able to be borrowed and forgiven within this process as well.
Yeah.
So bring everything, every dollar, every penny you pay out in a statement, either quarterly or monthly. You're going to want to bring that stack of papers with you. A lot of banks are going to do in-person meetings, but a lot of banks are also going to be doing remotely. The banks will be creating online portals to upload these documents. So you may just end up submitting 12 months of check stubs that were sent, and they'll run it through a system, or their loan officer will go through the data, and they'll come out with the answer on the other end. So yeah, you're just going to want to have all that information. Every penny you give out to an employee, you'll want to provide, and you'll want to provide the federal income tax withholdings information too, because they need to know that it was withheld so that they can build that calculation.
Right. I did have one question as far as I've been doing a little bit of reading, and I think you have to, you know, once you get the money, you get the loan, you have a certain amount of time, I think, to, you know, that you have to use it. Do you have
Correct.
any idea how that's going to be tracked?
Yeah, so it says from the loan date. So from the loan origination date, which is the date where they deposit the funds into your checking account or hand you a piece of paper, a paper check, you have 8 weeks to spend the money that they give you. So only money spent within those 8 weeks can be forgiven as a part of this program. Well, before I go on to that, because that's kind of in another section, but Al, do you have any questions about what churches can be doing in advance of the application?
Yeah, I took your suggestion from yesterday. I called our bank today, which is a federal credit union, and they said they do not participate in any SBA programs. And they said, I mean, their counsel was just directly contact the SBA, just go to their website.
Okay. Yeah, so that can give you some information. However, the information the SBA has put out has said they are not processing the loans. The local banks are going to be the ones processing the applications. So in your case, Al, you know, finding another local bank that has, you know, you're in Harrisburg, you're in the capital, so there's got to be I know that BB&T is in the area of Harrisburg, and I know that they are doing these loans because Harrisonburg does their banking through them, and they're going to use them. But I know M&T for the conference office, M&T Bank is offering them. So the loan will have to be filled out and applied for through them. So yeah, so Al, you'll have a little bit of an extra step there.
That's not a problem. I just thought I'd check and let you know that our credit union is not involved. And I don't know if that's typical for credit unions, federal credit unions.
Yeah, I think that churches that use a credit union are going to find that. Credit unions tend to be, you know, small, regional, built around, you know, they came out of a large industrial business or some sort of large corporation the credit union of all the employees put their money together and formed a bank 100 years ago. But they tend to not be spread across any sort of large region.
Right.
So, great. Well, so then to calculate the maximum amount for the loan is that you can basically get 10 weeks worth of salaries as your loan amount. So they use the average monthly payroll from the past 12 months. So that's April of 2019 through March of 2020. The full year's monthly payroll expenses, add them together, divide it by 12. That'll give you your average. Again, don't count the federal income tax that gets withheld from the staff paychecks, and don't count any amount above $8,333 per month, because you can't do any amount above $100,000 a year.
That's for a single staff member.
For each single staff member, correct. Yep. So if you've got two people that make $120,000 a year at your church, and the rest make $50,000, you'll be able to borrow enough to pay all your $50,000 salaries and $100,000 worth of your $220,000 people. And then, so the remaining payroll is going to just have to come out of your normal funds that you have in your bank. So you get your 12 months, you divide it by 12 to get your average, and then you're going to multiply that by 2.5. And that's going to give you 2.5 times monthly payroll, or 10 weeks worth of your payroll. That amount, you're going to apply for a certain dollar amount. You're going to submit your tax documents to your bank, and the lender, the bank, is going to make the determination of your loan amount based on the tax documents. So you could put $10 million that you want to borrow as your loan amount. And if the bank says, based on your information, you can only borrow $75,000, they're going to just loan you the $75,000. So you want to try to make your application as close to what you think it's going to be as possible. But if you make an error in that calculation, the lender is not going to over loan you money. Banks don't like to just give out their money. So the bank is going to review your tax documents, make sure you've got the right amount. They may ask you to refill out the application with a different amount in there if they find you've over or under your funds. But that's going to be how you'll do that. But something to just keep in mind is you're borrowing 10 weeks worth of payroll. You have to spend the money within 8 weeks. So all the money has to be gone out of your account if you want it to be forgiven within 8 weeks, which means you can't pay 10 weeks worth of payroll. You're only going to be able to pay 80% of this money out as a payroll expense to your employees. And 75% of it must be used for payroll. So you can't do one payroll check and put the rest into your mortgage or your rent. You have to, without exception, use at least 75% toward your payroll. And so if you do 2 months worth of payroll, that'll get you to just about 80% of these funds going out toward payroll costs. So that'll make you safe. And the remaining 20 to 25% can be used for a few other purposes. It can be used for your mortgage interest. So for our churches, if you have a Free Methodist Foundation loan, you can pay the interest portion of your payment out of these funds. If you rent your facility, you can use these funds to pay that. And you can also use them for utility payments. So your internet, your sewer, water, electricity, any utilities that your church has. So those are the only 4 things: mortgage interest, facility rental, and utilities and payroll costs are the only things you're allowed to use this money for. And money spent on those things are the only things that will be forgiven in this process. So So at this point, so Chris, any clarifying questions or points or anything you want to make sure is clear?
I think you covered it all. Again, I assume you'll be working with your bank directly on, what you paid out as far as payroll, and then what you've paid out on the remaining, whatever the percentage is left over, rather go to your mortgage or utilities. Because I think you had mentioned earlier that the bank is the one that'll be making the decision if if the loan is, forgivable, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's exactly right. So working closely with your bank, it's going to be just important that every church track, like, if you normally have on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most extreme tracking you can imagine. If your church normally tracks their funds at like a 6 level, you're going to want to track these funds at a 9 or a 10. You're going to want every penny accounted for without any doubt. So some places are recommending churches open just a second checking account, an extra checking account for these funds to be going to, just as a temporary measure so you don't mix them into your general funds. If you use budgeting software like a Quicken, QuickBooks type of thing, creating a separate ledger just for these funds, a separate budget area for these funds should be sufficient. You probably aren't going to need to create the second checking account unless your bank tells you really should. But as long as you're taking like above and beyond every possible tracking you can for how this money is spent, that's going to be very important in the loan forgiveness process when you get to the end. Al, any questions about how to calculate the loan amount or how you're allowed to use the funds?
No, I'm sure once I take a look at the paper, it sounds like there's a grid with the proper layout of how to do it. So we're good.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So then moving toward loan forgiveness, kind of our third and last section, really. So the loan forgiveness is going to be based on a comparison of what they're calling full-time employee equivalent hours between, I haven't seen anything that's firm on this, but it seems like it's between February 15th and June 30th of 2019 as compared to the same dates in 2020. However, when I look at the application and looked at the Small Business Administration guidelines or the Department of Treasury guidelines, it actually seems like the bank is going to have some leeway with this. So I just started this position in the conference office, and I was a half-time pastor at a local church. And the lead pastor was full-time at the local church, and he also he stepped out of that appointment into a different position. And the new appointed lead pastor that'll be full-time isn't starting until the end of May. And so that church, if you were to compare their total number of employee worked hours, so the lead pastor was 40, I was 20, the secretary was 20, the children's person was 10, and our worship leader was 7. So we had 80, 90, 97 hours a week payroll in 2019. During this same period, the lead pastor ended at the end of February. I ended at the end of March, and the new pastor's not coming till May. So for the major chunk of this church's time for this loan, they're only going to have the 20-hour secretary, the 10-hour family person, the 7-hour worship leader. So it's going to look, based on just that criteria, as though that church laid off a full-time and a half-time pastor. And so because of that, I think they've realized that, and they've begun to try to say, to give that extra nuance room to the local banks to make that decision. But that's going to be a conversation at the time of application to just look at you're filling it out with your banker and say, hey, how does the forgiveness really going to work at this bank? And they'll be able to give some better criteria guidelines for that. Again, the money has to be used for certain things. 75% has to be used for payroll, and every penny has to be spent that you want forgiven within 8 weeks. Anything I'm missing about the forgiveness, Chris?
No, I mean, I think you've pretty much nailed it dead on.
Okay. And Al, do you have any questions about the forgiveness?
Oh, we're good.
All right. So then just the very, very last thing. What happens if my loan doesn't qualify or part of my loan doesn't qualify for forgiveness? So, you borrowed $75,000 and you paid out $70,000, and they come back and they say, well, we can only forgive the $70,000 you paid out, and so that $5,000 will convert to a loan. Or the other situation, you borrow 75, you paid out 75, but you paid for some new communion equipment in your church. You paid $5,000 for some equipment in your church, a soundboard or something, and you're allowed. You can do that. The money just won't be forgiven. So you get to the loan forgiveness point, and they say, well, we can only forgive $70,000. Any remaining unforgiven amount remains as a loan. The interest rate is 0.5%, and the payments are spread across 2 years. And the first payment is deferred for 6 months from the loan origination date. So when you go in to apply for forgiveness, you apply for forgiveness. The bank has 60 days to make a decision, and any portion that they don't forgive, you then have 2 more months before you'll make your first payment. And then you'll have 2 years to make the payments with 0.5% interest rate. So, the question that you're going to have to ask is, I'm just going to say that that's a really good interest rate. It's a short-term loan, but if you get to the end of those 8 weeks and you realize, well, we've got $15,000 we've still got to spend, you can do a couple things. You can take that $15,000 to the bank, say we could only spend 60, and we want to forgive the 60, and here's 15 back. And you write them a check and you just pay off your loan in one lump sum. You may have to pay a handful of dollars of interest, but there's no prepayment penalties, so you just can pay it off. Or if you realize at that point, if we get to 8 weeks out from now, and churches are still meeting online, church funds are still down, we're still trying to figure out what to do, it might be something where you say to your board, you know what, we've got $15,000 extra, we've got $25,000 extra. Let's let this ride out as a loan. We'll make these minimum payments for 2 years, and we'll use this to help with cash flow in the church. That's going to be a decision that your local church has to make. We don't. I'm not going to recommend if you take a loan or don't take the loan, but your local board is going to have to make that decision if some part of these funds are not forgiven. So any thoughts on that, Chris, or questions, Al?
No, I just think it would be wise to, whichever bank you're going to choose to work with, to certainly understand, what's going to be the determining factors for each bank as far as whether a loan's forgiven or not. And I think they'll probably stick to the guidelines, but I don't know. I would feel comfortable. I'm certainly going to have that conversation with our banker, Like I said, it's not a big interest payment, but anything less that you don't have to pay, the better.
Right. Paying interest is always worse than gaining interest, right? So
there you go.
If you're paying interest, you're making somebody else, you're using the money that your members have tithed to make a banker more wealthy.
Right.
Al, any questions on the forgiveness? Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Oh, no. This was a question that kind of just goes back off topic to the beginning, so we can.
So I think my only question is not so much about where we are in the agenda here, but it's the question as to whether or not our Free Methodist Foundation has a division that would administer these loans.
I don't know. That is a good question to call Stephen Macaluso about. I think probably not, because I don't know if they're a bank, if they function as a bank, but
there was a season in which they were established as, they had a division that was established as a bank, was like a federally recognized bank. But then they reformatted their corporate structure over the years, so they may no longer have that delineation within their organization.
Okay. Well, so I'll say for anyone watching this as a later watching the recording, if there's no information below or above this video about the Free Methodist Foundation being able to facilitate the loans, then we either don't know yet or the answer is no. And if they are available, then I'll put information below or above this video with that information. And as soon as I'm done recording, I'm going to shoot a message over to the people at the foundation and inquire about that. So good thought, Al.
All right, sure.
Chris, what was your thing you thought of?
Well, actually, I think I was looking back over my notes. I think I've answered my question just in my notes. So I think we are all good, Tupper.
All right. Well, do you want to ask it for people watching, just in case someone's thinking the same question?
I kind of noted here that, our local bank that we're going to be working with, they're the ones that's going to be making the decision for the loan or not. I mean, is there anything particular that they might be looking at other than the requested, information, as far as like, your 1 year of payroll statements or, what other, information, that's in the forms that they're gathering. But I guess that'll probably be determined by each individual banking institution, I would assume.
Yeah. So the application has your status as a nonprofit or whatnot. Some basic business name, EIN, contact information. It's going to ask for the average monthly payroll and then the loan amount. And it asks this question about the number of jobs. And so to me, that's saying how many positions work at your place. It's not asking full-time equivalency. So the example I gave earlier of the church that I just stepped out of would put a 5 there. And then the purpose of the loan, the applicant ownership. So the owner's name, it's going to be how it's listed in your articles of incorporation. So most likely your trustees are going to be the people that are listed as the owners of your church organization. And then there's several questions. So it's going to ask about kind of, are people involved in bankruptcy? Are they ineligible? Are they disbarred from legal places? And yeah, there's several questions on this that I can't really give guidance about how to answer, but they're all yes or no questions. There are 6 of them, and you'll go through those 7 questions. I would say if you go to fill out this application before you go into your bank, and you're unsure of the answer to a question or how you should answer it, or whether it's a yes or no for you, and it just doesn't make sense because the loans are built around for-profit businesses. That's right. What the Small Business Administration has done. And so this is the first time that these kind of funds have been available for nonprofits and for religious organizations. And so this form is very, it lists it as though it's a business. And so right. Some of the questions are going to be hard for our churches to answer. And I would just leave it blank until you can ask your banker and say, hey, I'm filling out this application for this. I'm not sure what this means. And just, that's a better solution than trying to make up an answer and guessing and hoping that you're right.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. Well, so then I don't think there's anything else with regards to this loan process. That's the stimulus package. There are other programs within the stimulus package that our churches could qualify for. However, if you participate in the Paycheck Protection Program, you are disqualified from these other programs. So the other programs are designed, this program is designed to allow businesses and churches and organizations to continue paying their employees their full salaries while their employees sit at home and are not working for their organization. That's the concept of it. or if they're an essential organization, to continue working to cover the payroll costs for the decreased pay. The other parts of the stimulus package, one of them is, increased unemployment benefits. So they don't want your employees, your staff, to file unemployment and pay their bills through unemployment benefits. The stimulus package is meant to keep people on payroll. So you don't have to shut down. You don't have to have nobody working. But the point of it is to keep people on the payroll. So one of the other programs gives the church money for sick leave. Well, you're not going to pay your employees sick leave if they're working, if you're paying them their salary. And then another one is to defer your employer portions of FICA. And so non-pastor staff at your church. But that, again, you are disqualified from that program if you participate in the payroll protection program. So just keep that in mind. There's other portions of the stimulus package that may or may not benefit your church. If this isn't the right program for you in your church, some of those might help with the church. But this is the most generous and the easiest program to participate in by far. So any last follow-up questions before we sign off, Chris or Al?
Nope.
Oh, it's been very helpful.
All right, great. Well, I'm going to stop the recording